I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare in-the-trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today I'm sitting here with the Prince of Darkness, writer, producer, director David Goyer, the man behind Batman Begins, the Blade series, Dark City, Crow City of Angels, Flash, and 1,000 other movies I'm probably forgetting. How'd you get so busy? And welcome.
Thanks for having me. How'd I get so busy? I'm a workaholic, I guess.
Where does Prince of Darkness come from?
Prince of Darkness, well, originally...
You're a nice guy.
I am a nice guy.
You love children and pets.
Bunny rabbits and sunsets and long walks on the beach. A high school teacher dubbed me that, and somehow I was doing some interview with Premier magazine, and that stuck, and then they did an article, and then in the lame way that other, articles in magazine, yeah, they're just suddenly he's the Prince of Darkness. So.
When did you decide to be a screenwriter? Was it always that for you, or did you come to it?
I was going to be a homicide detective in Michigan. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I had been accepted to Michigan State, and I was going to get a degree in police administration and become a homicide detective. And some of my high school teachers just flipped out and called up my mother and said, "We think he should be a screenwriter," bizarrely.
Wow, like specifically screenwriting?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
To my surprise, I was accepted to USC and decided to go, and upon arriving at USC was promptly kicked out of beginning screenwriting for arguing too much with my teacher.
Did you pick up stuff at USC that was
I
beneficial?
mean, I clearly did. In my case, I knew nothing about filmmaking or screenwriting,
right.
And I was just coming from Michigan, so obviously I learned something. But nowadays, with the internet and all these other tools, I don't know that it's entirely necessary to go to film school. I mean, there's so many filmmakers that didn't go to film school that are successful, and just the whole aspect of filmmaking is so much more accessible to people now.
Was there a particular moment where you gained full confidence of your skills as a screenwriter, where you didn't, I don't know if you ever had doubts, but was there a moment where you're like, I got it, this is going to work?
Yeah, actually, it was the script for Blade.
Okay.
I mean, I had been writing professionally for at least 5 years before that, and looking back on it, I look at some of the stuff I had written and even gotten made and said, God, I can't
Pretty good Van Damme movie.
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah, but that's
before
like,
Blade.
That's like saying, I don't know what you say, like, it's the best Steven Seagal movie. Okay, great. Or it's the best Dolph Lundgren.
Everyone has to start somewhere.
Yeah, that was the first thing I had done, which was this Van Damme movie, Death Warrant. But I think Blade was maybe the 8th or 9th script I had written.
Okay.
And it was the first time that I felt like everything just clicked.
Right.
And for me, prior to Blade, even though I wrote the script, it took about 4 years for the film to be made.
Right.
Prior to Blade, I was still auditioning for jobs. I really had to pitch myself really hard. And what was interesting with Blade, and this can happen with screenwriters, is the movie hadn't been made, but it had become this sort of infamous script that was circulating around town that people really liked. And it happens every once in a while, and you can make a name for yourself on something that even doesn't get made. And after Blade, I, for the first time, just got offered projects without having to audition for them.
What attracts you to dark material over things that might be more like fantastical or escapist or a little lighter?
I mean, I like seeing lighter fare, but clearly the kind of themes that I'm attracted to, I mean, every movie I've ever done, with the exception of Batman Begins, has been R-rated. And Batman Begins is certainly, I think, about as dark a PG-13 film as you could get, and certainly people were surprised at how dark it was. And I mean, I'm really interested in anti-heroes. I'm really interested in characters that are conflicted. I'm interested in characters that have to sort of go to a dark place, and people that are alienated and whatnot, probably because I'm sure there's a little bit of my own experience as a kid or something like that in there.
What do you think was the beginning of this kind of current wave of superhero movies?
The first really significant comic book movie was the Richard Donner Superman film in 1978. The next really significant one was Tim Burton's Batman film. But they didn't really open the floodgates in terms of all these other superhero movies. And that really happened with the first Blade film that you and I did, actually. And the reason for that, I guess, is because aside from the Batman and Superman franchises over at DC being somewhat dormant, Marvel itself was in bankruptcy.
Right.
And I remember the very first meeting we had for Blade was the first day that Avi Arad, who's now the head of Marvel, got on the job. And what was significant about that film is it wasn't a a well-known property. It wasn't the jewel of Marvel's crown. It was
Right.
a C-list character that didn't even have his own comic book. And it was significant because there was always this assumption that you could make comic book movies out of maybe 5 characters over DC and 5 over Marvel, and that was it. But they realized with Blade, this totally C-list character, oh my God, this character in and of itself can generate a $300 million franchise, and oh my God, we've got 9,000 characters. It's just a free-for-all.
The fans have always said, we want this kind of Batman. They showed up for Tim Burton's Batman, they showed up for your Batman and Chris Nolan's Batman. The fans have continually said, not just comic book fans, but moviegoers, we want it to be treated seriously. Not that it has to be dour, but we want it appropriately treated. Characters lasted for 75 years. Why did they let it drift into camp?
I think it's a generational thing. I mean, first of all, the public's conception of Batman, and this is specific to Batman, aside from the fans, is the 60s TV show.
Where are those people who want that Batman? I've never run into one of those people.
I don't think they want it,
Right.
but I think that's what they think of as Batman.
Right.
And so my grandmother, my uncle, my mother, they didn't read comic books. They don't know the Dark Knight from,
Right.
you know, whatever. But the other thing I think is that it's a generational thing. I think what's happening now with filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro and, you know, Singer and Nolan and, you know, Sam Raimi and Proyas to a lesser extent, you know, myself, is we all grew up actually being weaned on these comic books. We loved them. We sort of, you know, ate, breathed, and slept them.
Right.
And again, we weren't looking down at the material. And I think it took that generation of filmmakers to come of age in order to really treat them seriously for the studios to get it.
Like a generational thing.
Exactly.
Did they approach you about the Flash? Similar, like, did you get a phone call and say we want it, or did you go to them and say?
No, after Batman Begins, Warner Brothers owns DC Comics, and they'd obviously had a good experience on that, and so they came to me and said, which was fun for especially for a comic book geek like me, and said, any DC character you want, what do you want to do? We want to do another.
Right.
They were primarily pushing Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, or The Flash. I had no particular love for Wonder Woman. And I just thought The Flash would be fun, and that no one had really exploited those powers, you know, cinematically yet. So that's what I'm working on right now. When
you sit down and begin to write a movie like The Flash or any movie that you've worked on, do you think in pictures first and then words, or words first?
In the case of The Flash, I did something similar to what I'd done in Batman. The first thing I did was just sat down, locked myself in a room for a week, and just reread everything I could possibly reread. And I did 2 things. A, I made a list of just cool moments or lines in no particular order that I just thought had to be in the movie. And then I also made a list of, you know, what, if you boil The Flash, or you boil Batman down, or you boil Blade down, what are the elements that absolutely have to be there? What's the story about? What's the, you know, in the case of Batman, obviously there are core elements that have to be there, but in terms of the theme, you know, it was a story about fear and overcoming your fear and living in the shadow of your father and being afraid that you're not going to, you know, fulfill, you know, his, you know, what he was trying to do and, you know, honor his memory. In the case of The Flash, I had to do the same thing and figure out what's the metaphor, what's the theme of this movie. And what I decided for The Flash, should we be fortunate enough to make it, is it's the Icarus myth in a way that speed is the only modern vice. You know, there's all these vices that exist time immemorial, but speed is something relatively new, and it's addictive. And you know, if you run too fast, you'll run yourself literally out of existence, but you'll also sort of won't be able to stop and smell the roses, and you'll leave the people you love behind. And so that's sort of the emotional core.